the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the United States experienced a remarkable growth of the immigrant population and witnessed scientific and medical developments that facilitated the selection of desirable and respectable immigrants. Between the 1890s and the 1920s, the American government passed several immigration acts to exclude newcomers with mental or physical defects and expanded the excludable classes of immigrants. The actual number of deportees was small, but their presence alerted the American public of the danger of the new immigrants. Compared to physical defects, insanity was difficult to detect due to its relative invisibility and cultural differences in its manifestations and diagnosis. Nevertheless, insanity was often discussed to prove the undesirable nature of the immigrant population, and the popular eugenic ideas of the time period justified its exclusion. Financial concerns at the American borders also posed a problem in detecting immigrants with mental defects. In 1912, against the criticism that immigration officials failed to implement the Immigration Acts, the acting secretary of the Department of Immigration asserted, quote, "$1 will only go so far, and we cannot get $2 worth of work for $1, unquote. The medical deportation of the alien insane was not just a political measure against diseased immigrants. It reflected social anxieties of the time period, and the causes and symptoms of insanity among immigrants revealed deeply ingrained gender and racial stereotypes of the strangers in the land. Here I focus on gender and racial differences among the immigrant insane in the United States by examining deportation records and patient case files. Concerns with public health and racial degeneration led to the decision to incarcerate the alien insane at public institutions and eventually deport them from the country. As in the medical inspection, economic benefits of removing the alien insane from the United States motivated both state and federal government to participate in the exclusionary process that brought together state mental institutions and immigration stations. At the same time, political, social, and cultural norms of the late 19th and early 20th centuries offered various ways to read immigrants' immorality and delusions, which frequently appeared in deportation and patient case records. Immorality was often a symptom of insanity for female immigrants. When it came to male immigrants, it was a cause rather than a symptom. But unless taken to excess, their immoral behavior seems to have been tolerated. Immorality and sexual delusions were not uncommon among native-born mental patients. Yet the ways in which they were pathologized among the alien insane reflected these immigrants' marginalized social positions and the general attitudes toward the new immigrants at the turn of the 20th century. How important was sexual immorality or delusion in evaluating the mental conditions of immigrants? What role did their gender and race play in identifying a deviant sexual relationship as a mental problem? This paper uses two sets of records. One is deportation cases of insane immigrants from Ellis Island, New York, and the other is commitment abstracts and patient records from California state hospitals and the San Francisco Immigration Station. They provide detailed information of the causes and symptoms of insanity to which immigrant patients were allegedly subjected, and shed light on gender and racial differences among the alien insane. Gender differences have long been noted in the scholarship of insanity. Contemporary discussions of immigration and mental illness emphasize that female immigrants are more likely to go insane than their male counterparts because of their inability to assimilate and reproductive roles, while a large number of men succumb to the illness due to physical causes. They share various symptoms in common: a fear of persecution, incoherence, filthiness, and violence. However, one of the most revealing symptoms of insanity among the immigrant patients was their sexual immorality and delusions. Female immigrants, especially Chinese and Japanese, were associated with prostitution or white slavery. Although some Americans view this association as a manifestation of their undesirable nature, others argue that prostitution was a result of insanity, not the other way around. For men, syphilis infection, masturbation, sexual excess, or opium, alcohol, tobacco abuse led to or became a sign of insanity. For example, masturbation, a much examined cause of insanity in the 19th century, still existed as an exciting cause of insanity in the early 20th century. Sexual immorality of male immigrants was almost given as they were frequently diagnosed of general paralysis, a tertiary form of syphilis that led to insanity marked by delusions and dementia. Thus, what became more problematic for male immigrant patients were the contents of their sexual delusions rather than their immoral behavior. Female sexual immorality posed a grave danger as it was combined with a fear of hereditary degeneracy and a possibility of white slavery. Immorality was, however, hard to define. As historian Theodore Molani shows, deporting female immigrants based on the moral turpitude clause was not easily implemented, and thus the likely to become a public charge clause was adopted in many instances. It was even more difficult to define insanity, as a term used to encompass all forms of mental defects. Nevertheless, immorality itself often functioned as a symptom of insanity among female immigrants. In 1908, Veronica, an 18-year-old Polish girl who had arrived in the United States from Austria in 1906, was brought to the Ellis Island immigration station for deportation. Arrested on the street by a police officer for vagrancy and put into a home in New York City by a probation officer, Veronica was committed to the Manhattan State Hospital for insanity after trying to kill herself by jumping from a window. Soon, a warrant of deportation was issued for her violation of the Immigration Act. Her two sisters in New York claimed that Veronica was always a private person and her family never suffered from insanity. According to the eldest sister, a doctor told her that Veronica had been 2 months pregnant when the warrant was issued. Veronica was so ashamed of her pregnancy that, in her sister's words, she had gone crazy over it. Based on the interviews, the acting secretary of the Department of Immigration canceled the warrant, confirming that her condition appeared after her arrival. However, 5 months later, the State Board of Alienist Physicians declared that she was in fact not pregnant, but suffering from a mental disease. Moreover, the probation officer testified that she must have followed, quote, an immoral calling, unquote, while she was living on the street. Her false pregnancy and immoral life in the city were enough to override her sister's statements and to prove Veronica's insanity. Even after 20 years, immorality was still associated with insanity. In June 1928, Fox Lee, a social worker stationed at Ellis Island, reported a deportation case of a Sicilian woman with an expression of surprise. Quote, 2 strong men from the deportation office were called in to try to carry her away. Suddenly, her most private parts were uncovered, and everybody was shocked and recoiled. I tried to cover her with a towel, but that was insufficient. End quote. She continued, quote, today I would have pronounced her insane while she was in this fury. End quote. This behavior, which might have been quite common among the insane, was particularly abhorrent, but at the same time natural, because it was displayed by an immigrant woman not yet assimilated to follow the social norms of American society, and therefore far from the respectable American womanhood. Due to the small number of female immigrants from non-Western countries in the early 20th century, it is not easy, even in California, to make a full comparison between racially and ethnically different groups of immigrant women. However, several cases of non-white immigrant women at California state hospitals and the San Francisco immigration station show that they were suspected of being immoral or sexually exploited. Were they really insane, or were they unfortunately detained at either state hospitals or immigration stations due to their alleged immorality? It is hard to know. Nevertheless, sexual immorality of immigrant women often became a trope of their undesirability. Male immigrants were distinguished from native-born male patients by their delusions of sexual liaisons with American women. Being distressed or heartbroken by unrequited love was a common cause of insanity for both male and female patients. However, when a sexual lust or desire for American women was explicitly demonstrated, it became a serious problem that required immediate attention. A deportation case from Ellis Island well illustrates this point. In 1908, an Englishman named Alexander was deported from Ellis Island for insanity after he had become a public charge at the Manhattan State Hospital. His interviews with an immigration inspector specifically referred to his delusion that he came to the United States, quote, in search of the 2 princesses, one of whom he says is his wife. When asked by the inspector, "Are you married?" Alexander answered, "I guess so. I wasn't married anywhere. Someone married a princess for me. I came to New York in search of her." His case must have been viewed as harmless because the immigration inspector did not make any judgment on his character, and the medical doctor emphasized that these women were indeed imaginary due to its lack of sexual references. However, the delusion of pursuing women was significant in understanding the nature of insanity among other male immigrants. Records from California, where there were a substantial number of Oriental immigrants, illustrate that such delusions became more threatening when expressed by non-white men. Quite a few cases of Asian male patients at California state hospitals were reported to have delusions of sexual liaisons with American women. In July 1902, Ong Wong Lam, a Chinese cook, was committed to the Stockton State Hospital for his delusion. He claimed that, quote, "A woman had been stolen from him, and he was searching for her, that he had had sexual intercourse with a woman, but could not say whether she was a white woman or Chinese." End quote. There were other Chinese and Japanese, and later cases included dark Mexican patients with similar symptoms, who claimed that they were sexually involved with white women. They could have invented imaginary women as their desperate attempt to deal with the problems of bachelor society, which the records seem to imply. Or they could have been in real relationships with white American women, though in most cases, these relationships were not recognized. That is, non-white male immigrants' sexual liaisons, especially with white women, were perceived as an act of deviance, even on the verge of insanity. Such delusions, whether real or imagined, might have been interpreted as a threat to American womanhood, and therefore as a rationale for the exclusion of these immigrants. Pathologizing immorality and delusions of immigrants indicates that their insanity was often constructed, not by the reality of their immigrant experiences, but by the historical context that justified the exclusion of deviant newcomers and promoted the protection of American citizens. Thus, insanity of immigrants at the turn of the 20th century may be viewed as a lens through which to understand gender and race relations of the time period. Insanity, especially of immigrants, might have been a convenient label to deter the threats against conventional social and cultural norms. In addition, it exaggerated the presence of immoral women and delusional men among immigrants, rationalizing and fueling the contemporary social anxieties about immigration and insanity.